just wanted really to say this is the first of hopefully many of these series that will take place here. So now that you've found the way, you should be able to find it easier next time. And we'll be around hosting these and learning with you. So thank you, and up to you.
Thank you, Joanna, and thank you to all of you for coming to our first knowledge session of this year and our first in partnership with the Grantham Institute. We're very grateful to the Grantham for providing us with such a lovely venue and also for helping us with all this organisation, and particularly Emily, thanks so much for all of your help. Just to introduce myself, I'm a barrister. I'm practicing mainly environmental and planning law, and I'm also, as of this year, the Deputy Chair of Legal Voices for the Future. Legal Voices is a group that was launched last year by early career practitioners practicing in a range of different areas of law. And our aim is really to provide a discussion forum and an opportunity for young lawyers to learn more about issues related to the climate and ecological crises and how they interact with our practices. So our topic for today, as you will hopefully know, is the rights of nature. The rights of nature is not a new idea, but it is something that's increasingly gaining traction in the UK and other Western countries. So in terms of the structure of today's talk, I'm planning to give a quick intro to the topic, and then I will discuss with our panel of really interesting interviewees who have come along to speak to you today. And then finally, we will have some creative content led by Phoebe Tickell of Moral Imaginations. So to get started, in terms of I thought it would be useful first to talk about just the state of UK environmental law currently, and a relatively high level and generalized introduction to caveat it. But I think it's definitely correct to say that nature is not a rights holder in UK law. The way in which nature is recognised and protected in UK law is primarily through a patchwork of EU domestic legislation as well as common law protections. And in terms of the enforcement of environmental law in this country, nature doesn't have the ability to bring claims in its own right. We're reliant really on third parties such as public authorities with responsibility for enforcement of environmental law, and also to NGOs and other environmental interest groups and individuals. Nature can't bring a claim in its own right where there has been a harm caused to nature or to a feature of the natural environment, and it's not generally the beneficiary of any damages, particularly in the public law context. So moving on then to the rights of nature, I think it poses, the idea poses a really interesting question for lawyers, namely, how could things be different if nature did have rights, and particularly in the context of continued environmental degradation, nature depletion, and ecological crisis? And it poses the question, should we recognise a right for the natural environment or features of the natural environment protected in its own right and to bring claims in its own right? The idea of legal personhood for inanimate entities or non-human entities isn't something that's new. This was highlighted by Christopher Stone in his seminal 1972 essay, Should Trees Have Standing? And that essay was then soon after quoted in the dissenting judgment of Justice Douglas in the US Supreme Court case of Sierra Club and Morton, which was a case which concerned whether the Sierra Club could essentially bring a claim on behalf of the Mineral King Valley, which was threatened by development at the time. And that claim was unsuccessful, but the interesting dissenting judgment that I've put on the screen there, Justice Douglas, back in the 1970s, recognised that bodies such as ships and corporations are recognised in the law, but for some reason we don't afford the same protection to nature, and that it's not such a radical step actually to argue that inanimate entities or non-human entities should have legal rights and protections. So what could a legal system that does recognise the rights of nature look like? I think it's instructive in this regard to look at 4 different types of mechanisms by which the rights of nature, has been recognised within different legal systems.
Yay, house.
Yeah. How am I going to fit all my stuff on this? Oh.
Yeah. So back
to the topic. So the first type of mechanism by which the rights of nature has been recognised in legal systems is through constitutional protection. The most notable example of this is the example of Ecuador, which in 2008 recognised expressly nature's rights in its constitution. I've put some of the articles up there that recognise the rights of nature. And these constitutional amendments were based in part on principles that were derived from the culture and knowledge of indigenous communities living in Ecuador. And the effect of these constitutional amendments has been more than symbolic. For example, in the 2021 landmark Los Cedros case, the Ecuadorian Constitutional Court quashed a series of mining permits that had been granted in the Los Cedros cloud forest and ordered that the Ecuadorian authorities undertake reparatory measures to repair harm that had been caused to the forest, and also ordered that a management plan be put in place with measures including, for example, reforestation in the forest. So the constitutional amendments themselves then had a real practical impact in terms of the protection of nature within Ecuador. Another interesting example is Colombia. Colombia doesn't expressly recognize nature's rights in the same way in its constitution, but the Constitutional Court inferred that nature had rights from provisions of the Constitution that protect, for example, human and indigenous rights. And the court inferred that there was a requirement in those provisions to protect nature and biodiversity, also relying on indigenous rights. Also in that particular case held that the Atrato River, a specific river, did have rights and legal personhood. Again, the court ordered that the Colombian authorities exercise legal guardianship over the river, and also ordered that a board of advisors be set up to act essentially as the guardians or as a kind of trust for the river. So again, the practical impact in that case of recognising nature within the legal system and the requirement to take steps to protect the river itself can be seen in that particular example. Closer to home, the Irish Joint Committee on the Environment and Climate Action recently, towards the end of 2023, recommended that the Irish government put in place a referendum to discuss amendments to the Irish Constitution, also to recognise nature's rights. And this followed a citizens' assembly on biodiversity in Ireland. So the second mechanism by which nature's rights have been recognised in legal systems is through primary legislation. So the most notable example here is the case of New Zealand, which has certain parallels to the UK legal system as well, in terms of the absence of a written constitution. So in New Zealand, primary legislation has been used to protect three specific elements of the natural environment. Te Urewera, a former national park, the Wanganui River, and also Mount Taranaki, lovely pictures of which are on the screen right now. And this also followed campaigns which highlighted the spiritual and cultural importance of these features of the natural environment to the local Maori populations. The acts in New Zealand require, similarly to in the Atrato River case, a board of guardians to be appointed to act as the human face of the river. And those boards of guardians are made up of people appointed both by the Crown and by the government and by the local Maori tribes. Another example, again slightly closer to home in Europe, is the Mar Menor in Spain. So that's a polluted saltwater lagoon, and the Spanish Parliament also recently enacted a law to grant legal personhood to the Mar Menor, and also similarly ordered that a committee be made up of experts and members of the local community to sort of act as the guardianship body for the river. Given the kind of prevalence of grassroots movements and local community importance to rights of nature movements so far, it's unsurprising that another of the mechanisms by which rights of nature have been protected in legal systems is through local instruments. There have been a number of local ordinances passed in the US affording some sort of protection to the rights of nature. This included in 2006 a local ordinance in Tamaqua Borough in Pennsylvania, which was actually the first law that was passed that recognised rights of nature in the world. Some of those ordinances have been struck down by courts, so probably more vulnerable than the sort of top-down constitutional legislative approaches to recognising rights of nature. In Europe, we're now seeing increasingly similar movements. So, for example, in the Netherlands last year, a municipal law was passed requiring that a guardian be put in place to ensure the interests of nature be put at the forefront of local decision making. And so finally, the fourth mechanism by which you sometimes see nature's rights protected in legal systems is through the courts and the common law. So you saw this in Bangladesh, where the Supreme Court recognised the rights of the Turag River, and also in India, the two High Court cases in 2017 and 2022 respectively recognised the rights of particular features of the natural environment. But interestingly, the 2017 case was ultimately stayed by the Indian Supreme Court, partly on the basis of, well, it was reported that it was partly on the basis of a lack of certainty among officials who've been entrusted with the guardianship of the river about whether or not they also had certain responsibilities. For example, if the river flooded, whether or not people could in turn sue the river for the harm that had been caused by it. So then going back to the question of how in this country could things potentially be different if we were to recognise nature's rights. In this country, I think it's fair to say we probably, before any top-down approach were put in place, would need a cultural shift as a precursor. I think we have a tendency to see nature and the natural environment as a resource and as something that we are apart from rather than something that we're part of. And I think that often you see in the examples of places where rights of nature has been recognised successfully within legal systems, that there is some sort of grassroots cultural backing to it. In terms of though that sort of grassroots versus a top-down approach, if we're going to move away from the current position in environmental law, where you have something of a patchwork of protection for different sites or particular species, you would probably need some sort of overarching top-down recognition for nature's rights. It would be interesting also to draw on the examples of guardianship bodies that have been seen across the world, because that would potentially solve the issue of reliance on third-party enforcement or interest groups and environmental campaign groups being the ones who have to essentially uphold and enforce a lot of environmental laws. And also it could be interesting to see how you could perhaps make damages available or require restitution for environmental harm that's caused to an entity which holds legal rights. So just to end, before I talk to our speakers, rights of nature in the UK, then what's actually already happening? I mean, there are numerous local movements, in particular rights of river charters, that are taking off across the UK, all over the UK, which we'll speak about with Emma a bit more later. There are also various initiatives to give nature a voice in corporate settings. So in 2022, Faith in Nature appointed nature to its board of directors. And in 2023, House of Hackney followed suit, affording a voice to Mother Nature and future generations. Similarly, in terms of the top-down approach, there's been legislation which has been backed by the Green Party since 2021, which would see a Rights of Nature Act being passed, including the formation of an independent commission for nature to enforce and uphold any rights that were granted to nature. So it will definitely be interesting, I think, to follow the progress of these movements in the coming years. And with that, I will move over to speak to our speakers. And I'm sure you're all glad that your pictures are. So before we kind of kick off, would you all like to kind of give a very brief introduction of yourself and what you do?
Sure. I'll start as a non-lawyer here. Thank you so much for having me. And yeah, it's really exciting to see how full this room is. My name is Phoebe Tickell, and I run an organization. I'm the founder of an organization called Moral Imaginations. What Moral Imaginations does is that we work with imagination to create mindset shifts, to change policy, change economics, to change how organizations work. And we're trying to capitalizing a movement of what we call imagination activists. So people who are driven by imagination to see the world differently and then act differently from that place. And I used to be a scientist.
Hi everyone, I'm Powlesland. I am a barrister in my day job, but not actually an environmental barrister really. I've never trained in or studied environmental law. I see myself more as a wild lawyer, I guess, or a lawyer for nature, who is committed to doing whatever I can to protect the natural world I love through whatever legal mechanisms I can use to do that, and activism as well. I co-founded Lawyers for Nature 3 or 4 years ago, which aims to change the relationship between law, lawyers, and the legal system and nature. And I also run a charity to restore the river I live on in East London called the River Roving, where a lot of these ideas around practical guardianship of rivers and rights of nature sort of put them into attached to the real life setting.
Good evening, my name is Emma Montlake. I am a co-executive director of a charity called the Environmental Law Foundation. We were set up over 30 years ago to assist communities to access free legal advice in environmental and public interest matters. I'm also a director of a community interest company called Love Our Ooze, which was set up a couple of years ago to act for and promote the well-being of my local river, which is the River Ooze.
Good evening. I'm Jérémie, so I'm a young academic on the on the panel. I often call myself as an activist academic. I've been privileged to work with indigenous communities for the last 20 years, and this is how I can really strongly across the right of nature. When many indigenous communities were telling me, it's not about property, it's really not, which invited me to decolonize the way I do my work in terms of human rights law, and try to see what's behind the idea that we don't own property, nature. Nature is actually a relationship, which is not in our legal system. And from there, I basically started to work a lot more on the right of nature. I think thanks to COVID, I decided to work more on the local level, and started to invest myself with working more on local campaign in France and in the UK. And we'll talk more about this, but there's been a lot of grassroots movements on the right of nature in the last 2-3 years, which is very exciting, but we are needing finally some lawyers to support us. So I hope that we can have this conversation to see what we can use from you in terms of the activities. And last year, we established an interdisciplinary network on right of nature. Also, we feel like it can't be only lawyers talking to each other. So I'm working with ecologists, with economists. We try to share, because we use the term language of rights, but I mean, it will have an impact on society. So I think it's important for us to keep that conversation outside of the legal profession as well. So thanks, Flora, for inviting us.
Thank you. And can I just check at the back? Are you able to hear okay? Okay, great.
Is she
Okay.
and
Is that better? With the mic?
It's in the way.
Yeah. Hello? Yes, Emma. Great, okay, so I was going to ask you each a series of questions and then also have some kind of more general questions, but if anyone has anything interesting to say in response to someone else's question, then please chip in. But Paul, I was going to start with you. So you're a barrister, as you said, and you're a strong advocate for the protection of nature. And what for you is the argument in favour of granting rights to nature, or recognising nature's rights within our legal system?
I've actually been trying to write a chapter on why we need rights of nature, and actually it's a really difficult question in some ways, because the more you sink down into it, the more it becomes actually quite a spiritual question, which is ultimately the basis of all the rights we have in our society. Like why do we have rights to not kill people? Why did we abolish slavery? Why did we give rights to women? It's ultimately really down quite a spiritual question about how we want to relate to each other. I think there is a deep spiritual question around how we want to relate to the natural world. But I would also say, in a sheerly practical way, is that if we don't make the rights of nature is a key way to get a better relationship between humans and nature, both in the UK and in the world. And if we don't get a better relationship with nature, we will destroy ourselves and our own society. And I do think that for a lot of even people who are aware of the climate crisis and environmentalism, there is an over concentration on the climate crisis, which is the most serious crisis we face. But ultimately, the climate crisis is but one manifestation of the deeper underlying schism, which is the broken relationship between humans and nature and humans and the earth. And that crisis underlies all of the other dozens of crises that we face and that would probably destroy our society even if we solve the climate crisis. And there's also a risk as well that if we see the climate crisis purely a carbon problem, that we will end up actually destroying nature more in order to try and fix that problem. Because if we try and keep a society with the same energy intensity via renewables, it will entail wholesale destruction of huge swathes of the natural world. And then I guess so that we do need a different relationship between humans and nature in this country. Why is rights of nature the answer? I don't necessarily think it's a silver bullet. To me, it's actually not even really one intervention. It's about completely reinventing and reimagining our relationship to nature in our legal, political, economic, social systems, of which the law has a huge part to play in that, but it isn't just the only one. And if we imagine the ways in which your rights as a human are protected or dealt with throughout those systems, it's vast, isn't it? Of course, you have the right not to be killed as part of your ethnic group on an international level through the crime of genocide, and there's people campaigning for the crime of ecocide to mirror that. But you also have the right not to be killed in your own country. How do you replicate that for nature? You have the right to damages if someone injures you. You have the right to not have contracts breach. All of these things. And to me, rights of nature is a kind of broad umbrella for an ecosystem of interventions we need to have to start transforming that relationship. And the interesting thing about it being so broad is that pretty much no matter what your interest is or what your specialization as a lawyer or even as a professional, there's probably a way you can help to either bring about the rights of nature or to change that broken underlying relationship. And we'll probably discuss it more in later on, but the Faith in Nature project is a really good example of that. You know, as company law, we actually need to go into something you wouldn't necessarily think of initially as environmental based, but actually is potentially a way to like change that relationship.
Yeah, so that kind of, in terms of your own career then and where you come from, I think I'm right in saying that you kind of initially became involved in legal issues to do with nature through tree injunction cases. Could you kind of expand on that a bit in your journey into doing this type of law?
Yeah, I did sort of 5 or 6 years of being a kind of ordinary civil commercial barrister, not doing any environmental stuff at all. And then throughout that time, I was really falling in love with nature. I was never really brought up in a household or in a home valued nature, something I came across in my adult life. And I realized, I started to get into activism, but realized that I needed to bring the principles that I was doing in my activist life into my legal work, I guess. So I literally posted on a Facebook group for people who love trees, saying, is there a group for lawyers to help protect trees for free? And there wasn't, which is surprising. But someone said you should go and see what people in Sheffield are up to. And you may have all heard of Sheffield tree scandal, probably the biggest environmental fight of the last decade. And I ended up writing an advice for them and getting involved with them and representing them in court. And that was a real baptism of fire into environmental protection work or rights of nature work, I guess. And quite interestingly as well, a lot of that wasn't actually typical environmental law. It was representing people in an injunction case to try and protect the protectors almost. And there's actually, I think, a really neat example. I can do a couple of minutes, I just explain like how this kind of idea of a lawyer for nature can work in a more recent case I did up in Wellingborough almost a year ago. We get loads of emails into our inbox from people desperate to say the nature they love, and I'm sure you do.
Well, it was you once on it as well.
On the
And so I got this email through, I think that the final email I got was like at the end of a weekend, and I'd basically been really busy. I'd heard about it, but I hadn't actually looked into it in a great a great level of detail. And I saw this email and realised that the people actually were kind of correct that these trees were due to be illegally felled, and they were trying to bring that forward to their council, being like, you can't chop these trees down. The trees had tree preservation on them. And I basically decided to write an advice and spent 3 or 4 hours on a Sunday night writing that advice up and sent that off to them. And then the next morning, expecting that advice to be given to the developer and the police on the scene, hopefully they would actually listen to that advice and not chop the trees down, because the end of my advice was it would be illegal to chop these trees down. And that's in some ways, that's exactly what an environmental lawyer would do, I guess. But the next stage is where I think is what illustrates this idea of being a lawyer for nature, or maybe a wild lawyer, is the police completely ignored that advice and moved away and arrested protesters and allowed the developer to fell like 10 of these trees. They wanted to fell 60 of the longest avenue of lime trees in the UK, one of the longest avenues of lime trees. And they felled 10 trees. And I was like, completely against the law. And a lot of lawyers then would be like, okay, well, what we'll do is we'll start a claim against the police for unlawful arrest, and maybe get an injunction, but the people on the scene couldn't afford the injunction. And I was like, actually, I'm going to go there myself and speak to the police, take them through my advice. So I travelled all the way up to Wellingborough, got up at like 8 in the morning, went down in my suit with a ski suit over it, 'cause it was really cold. And luckily, as it transpired, and walked the police through my advice. And they were like, yeah, very interesting, but we're not going to get involved. And literally 15 minutes later, I saw them walking towards us in that way. They definitely wanted to arrest someone. They have a certain walk and they're about to arrest you. And they were basically like, we're going to arrest anyone who stands underneath these trees for aggravated trespass. And I then took a video of me basically being incredibly annoying as a lawyer and shouting out the full legal test for them, being like, which part of the tree preservation TPO regs 2013 are you relying on for the exemption for TPOs? Can you please explain? Because otherwise it's not aggravated trespass. Aggravated trespass only exists if it's unlawful, if it's blocking a lawful act, blah, blah, blah. And this police officer is clearly in a bit panicked, doesn't know what to do, and just reads out the same statement. And at that moment, again, there's a choice. You can like walk away, and then 6 months later, you can win your illegal arrest claim. But I was like, you know what? I believe in my advice. My advice is correct. My legal position is correct. There's only one way that's actually going to save these trees in a direct way. So I just started climbing the tree and occupying. Like, it was really, I didn't intend to do it. It genuinely wasn't planned. Almost I didn't realize I was doing it because I was up in the tree and looking down at the police. And I don't feel like I'm trying to go into full depth. It was a quite hilarious day in some ways. Like, I didn't have any prep. I was having too much information. I had to like wee into a bottle and like pour it down the tree, but I had no way of going to the toilet. They initially let some food and stuff up, but then stopped me doing that at all. Then they got Harris fencing and put it all the way around the tree, and this like slightly sheepish looking officer put crime scene tape all the way around. But also I had like my phone with me. So this is again like about, are you a lawyer? Are you an activist? So I then went on Twitter and told the story of these trees, even screenshotting my legal advice into the Twitter thread so everyone can see, is my advice wrong? Told the story of these trees, and they went viral, and I started doing news interviews while up in the tree. And eventually the head of the event basically like melted the local council social media down, and it all went crazy locally. The head of the council came down and negotiated. If I came out of the tree, they'd have a meeting with local people. Next day, I came down the tree, got arrested. It got dropped 6 months later, so my career's fine. And had a meeting the next day where I basically like acted on behalf of those local people as their representative pro bono, just saying like, again, where's the law here? And it's now going through the system. They managed to raise £30,000 to bring judicial review proceedings, and then instructed a solicitor firm and another set of barristers to like do that JR proceeding. And I think they're going to win and save those trees. But the point is, if I hadn't been a lawyer, I couldn't have helped them at all. If I'd just been a lawyer, the tree would still be gone, and you can win the legal point 6 months later. It's pointless. There's a really interesting role that can be played somewhere in that space between lawyer, activist, and a person who loves nature so much they will do whatever it peacefully and mostly legally takes to protect it. And I really urge you to consider, all of you, stepping into that space, because it's a very, very powerful one. and you can make a huge difference on behalf of the earth if you do that. I don't want too long, but I think it illustrates quite a nice point about that
Yeah,
distinction.
You mentioned Lawyers for Nature and the work that you've been doing, I think, with Bronte in the kind of corporate sphere. Could you kind of expand a bit on Lawyers for Nature and what you've been doing with that group?
Yeah, so we regularly, as I said, that previous one came in an email in our inbox, and we regularly get random calls from people with crazy ideas. And I got a call, I think I was out cycling, and this guy was like, I want to make nature the CEO of my company. Now, many people at that point would be like, oh, a bit crazy, you should probably get out of this situation. But I was like, you know what, let's roll with this and see what we could do with this, how we could play with it. And I then went to Bronte, who's my co-director at Lawyers for Nature, and she's actually a recovering corporate lawyer and academic. And she started researching it and found that actually making this nature the CEO wouldn't really work for a whole host of reasonably obvious reasons. But actually, it was very legally possible to put nature as a director of the company. So we then worked with Faith in Nature to research that and to work out legal ways to actually enshrine the nature director onto the board of their company and change their articles. They had to take account of nature in their decision making. And they were the first company in the world to do that. Actually, ironically helped by the UK's very liberal corporate company laws, which basically allow you to do largely what you want as long as you're paying your debts and the shareholders agree, which they all did because Faith in Nature is very nature friendly already. And then the second company did that this autumn, House of Hackney, and other companies are now starting to follow suit. And Bronte's been sitting as a nature director for over a year now. I keep asking her, like, have there been major like showdowns on the board? And basically, Faith in Nature is so good as a company, there actually hasn't been, because like Bronte's like, we need to do this for nature, and they're like, yeah, we're going to do it. And actually, a lot of the time, it's changed the company culture so much, they just like preempt now. They have staff meetings where they just decide, they bring nature into those meetings. What would nature want us to do? So actually, by the time it gets to board level, it's kind of already nature friendly, just quite an interesting cultural shift idea. And now changing, extending it again. So I'm now having to lead a project where we're going to bring into third sector governments, charities, CICs, quangos, maybe government departments. So local councils, exactly. And starting to research using examples around the world, like the Wanganui guardianship, for instance. What would it look like if nature was represented on the board of a catchment partnership, or a local council when they deal with their trees, or charities, whether environmental or otherwise? That's been we're just at the start of that. We don't entirely know the answers, but it's a really interesting question to start exploring. And again, if anyone is interested in the research side of that, then please do speak to me afterwards. We basically would love people to give us ideas or research on how this is being done around the world and how that might be transposed into a UK context. And it's literally, we have volunteers pretty much across all those categories now who, if we recommend something, they will probably do it. So it'll be the first charity in the UK, possibly the world, to do it. The first CIC, first catchment partnership. Just quite exciting stuff. And that also, I think, something else to say, and I'm trying to like do the hard sell on rights of nature to you all. That's why whatever aspect you decide to get involved in, I'm sure others here will outline different ways you can get involved. But it's really exciting. So much of law, I found this when I was studying, then you found it. So much of law is just kind of repeating something that someone else has already said. Like, here's an article about some academics talking about a law that was made 100 years ago and they had different opinions on it. Let me reiterate that for you in a slightly different way that sounds intelligent. And what is so both exciting and also nerve-wracking about rights of nature is it is to be determined. You could literally be there determining a whole new area of law. And I think one of the most exciting. And I truly believe that rights of nature will be to the 21st century what human rights were to the 20th. And you could be right in at that start to really figure out, what is it going to look like? What is a legal system that is in tune with the earth and actually listens to the voice of nature? What does that look like? Let's find out.
Thank you so much. And Emma, I have a couple of questions for you now. So you're obviously also involved in rights of nature related initiatives in the UK. But before we come on to that, you, I think, similarly have kind of an interesting journey into environmental law and where you currently are at the Environmental Law Foundation. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yes, thank you. Can you all hear me? Yeah. So I guess it's not untrue to say that I was a very reluctant lawyer. My family, quite a lot of my family were lawyers, so I had quite a lot of pressure to become a lawyer. I trained with my family and sort of fell into commercial property as a young lawyer. Miserable. I was miserable. But I was all right, and you know, and the money was quite good, and sort of, you know, as a young person, that sort of felt okay. But at the background, I had been. My mother was an amateur naturalist. So I had a big passion for nature already, and trying to find a way to bring the two together. I had heard about the Environmental Law Foundation, I think just as I was graduating from law school. I read a press release about its founding, and it was on my radar. It was like, one day I'm coming to the Environmental Law Foundation. At the time, they ran an internship. Sadly, they don't anymore. We don't anymore. So I got to a point in my career where I just thought, actually, I need to change this. It's not making me happy. So I saved my pennies, and I took a sabbatical. I resigned from my job, and I said, I'm going to go and intern with the Environmental Law Foundation. My boss said, "You are mad." I said, "I don't care, I'm off." Anyway, so I went to the Environmental Law Foundation. I was there as an intern. The internship really was about case management, and we take calls from members of the public who have environmental concerns, public interest concerns. So I was very involved in that, and fortuitously, whilst I was there, a job came up. Suffice to say, I never actually left. So I am still there, and sort of I had a few years off, maternity leave, and then came back, and yeah. So I suppose it was a slightly circuitous route to get to a place where I felt that I was satisfied and happy with the work that I was doing. It embraced both my passion for nature and the reluctant lawyer. I suppose my takeaway from that is, you know, if you find yourself a reluctant lawyer, don't despair. You know, there are alternatives to the way that we can map out our careers. So you know, live your passion, I think, is my main my main call out there. Great.
It's an important part of the story. I just want to clarify.
Oh yes.
Yeah. How many local groups do you think you've helped to protect nature since you've been talking hundreds, thousands?
Oh, well, thank you. That's a good
So I think it's
question.
really important.
No, I mean, well, definitely thousands. I mean, you know, we take something in around 300 inquiries a year, and that will be an individual who will approach us, but behind the individual, there are, you know, often many thousands of people. And what is so wonderful about ELF, and of course I'm hugely biased in this, but you know, you are working with local people who really care. You know, we spend so much of our time, I think, in our consciousness, feeling despair and fear about what's happening to our environment and to the nature that we love. But to know that there are people out there who care is really emboldening, and yes, and I take my hope from that. But yes, I think probably thousands, hundreds of thousands.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh,
Yeah.
thank you.
Thank you for everything you've done. Yeah.
And on the topic of passionate local community movements, could you tell us a bit about what's been going on in Lewis and the Ooze charter?
Yes. So the origin story for the Lewis, group of individuals who feel very protective and passionate about our local river, and also slightly bewildered. The ooze runs right through Lewis and is ignored. Feels like it doesn't really have the prominence that it is merited to have. So actually Paul is part of this origin story. Paul has been a great inspiration to us as an advocate for rights of nature. So we set up a community interest company, Love Our Ooze, and in September 22 we had a river summit, a river festival to celebrate about the ooze. Paul came down, he talked about rights of nature and his incredible advocacy that he has. And afterwards, we did this facilitated session with an audience, and it was really powerful. We said to the audience, "What do you think? What rights does our ooze have?" And one clever person said, "The right to be represented at planning meetings," and we all went, "That's interesting." Anyway, so that was that, and then at the Environmental Law Foundation, I was working with a district councillor at Maidstone, and we brought Paul into that as well. And he wants to change the constitution, and he'd done this by presenting a motion, and we went away and we thought, "Oh, we could do that." And we had a district councillor who was one of our party, who presented a motion, and this was last February, and it got passed. But it didn't just pass. It did something very interesting, which I just paused to take a moment to reflect on, because I just sat through the most rancorous political debate. I just came away thinking, oh my God, local politics is absolutely poisonous, between the Green Party and the Independents and the Tories. But at the same meeting, we had this motion proposed, and it changed the room, it changed the atmosphere. The Tories, we understood, were going to vote against it, but they disregarded the party line, and we had 7 Tories, 5 who supported it. One of the district councillors started off her talk by saying, "This is very controversial, but I am a woman of the earth," and we all went, "Oh my God." And we were away, and the motion got passed, and that was the starting point. It was a really, it was very moving, actually. What was amazing was that we saw how rights of nature and rights of rivers could bring people together. And actually people got it. And the background to this, of course, was that the ooze, as many of our rivers are horribly polluted, and even their ecological health is in massive decline. And actually district council is really angry with Southern Water, and felt really powerless to do anything. They passed a couple of motions, but nothing was changing. And I think it was felt that rights of rivers, rights of nature brought a new perspective. It was something positive. You know, again, we spend so much of our time feeling, you know, depressed and miserable, but it felt like it was something new. And if we could shift the way the council thought, then perhaps we could take it further from there. So we've done a lot of consultation with local people. We've had a citizens assembly. We did the consultation that I just mentioned, and now we're doing a river people tour up and down the ooze, taking that consultation, trying to find out from people what they think, what rights their river has. And what's amazing is you start to unpick the relationship that people have with their river, with nature, and to have to be able to talk about that, again, it really starts to move the way people think. For me, I walk along the Ouse most mornings, and you know, the fact that the Ouse isn't consulted about development that is happening on its banks just feels a bit strange to me now. You know, that shift is quite easy. It's not it doesn't take a big shift to start to think differently. And I, like Paul, would very much urge you who are at the beginnings of your careers to really understand that and take that away, that you have the power. You know, you will perhaps be advising big corporations or big banks, and we have to think differently about nature, or we are screwed. Yes, that's.
So in terms of where you are now with the Ouse Charter, and what kind of plans do you have for embedding the sort of rights of the Ouse in local decision making?
Yes, so we were very lucky. After the motion got passed, we had this sort of everything just exploded. Suddenly there were all these headlines about Lewis Ouse gets rights, and a bit like, that's not exactly what's happening. Anyway, but because of the publicity, we imagination, yes, I know, we're with that one. We were approached by an international lawyer, Monica Tinta, who was the amicus in the Los Cedros case. She rocked up and said, you know, I'll offer you pro bono, I'll come and help you. We also have Hogan Lovells have a pro bono scheme, so we're tapping into that. So we've got some really amazingly brilliant people helping us think about what are the local opportunities. We are looking at changing the constitution locally to incorporate nature's rights. Human rights already in there, so again, it's not a huge shift. We've sent something to the council, and they're thinking about it and waiting to hear what happens with that. We are looking at the draft local development plan, where we can embed nature's rights language into that, looking particularly at biodiversity. Obviously, you know, that would need to get past an inspector, so that needs a lot of careful thought. There's a corporate plan that we've put in a consultation response on, also thinking a little bit along the lines of what Paul has done with faith in nature, whether, you know, we can have somebody who, a local councillor who represents nature at council meetings, and also, you know, planning. How do we give nature a voice? How that's another, you know, big area of discussion. Monica is being very helpful in respect of that, and particularly looking at the Chateau example in Colombia. So there's all sorts of. I think we're just at the moment just taking a bit of a scattergun approach, just like, or whatever we can do. Let's chuck it and see if it sticks. Also, the four of us are part of a Rights of Nature collaboration, which is just amazing and really supportive. You know, we're all sort of working together, which is really wonderful. Just like nature collaborates, we're doing that as well. So there's you know, we're coming up to the anniversary this February. We hoped that we might have a draft charter by then, but I think time has slipped a little. But we are, you know, the council, we're lucky because our council is quite open to what we're doing. So yeah, I mean, there's all sorts going on, but it's really interesting.
Thanks so much, Emma. And Jeremy, you're just broadening out a bit. You've got more of an international focus to your work. Could you expand a bit on some of the different ways in which nature's rights have been recognised in different legal systems and the effectiveness of those kind of different mechanisms?
Yeah. And maybe to keep surfing on what Emma just saying, and also to join Paul on some of the points. You see something interesting with what's happening there, and again, the connection is going to be, I follow a lot of initiatives, say, in France, there's a parliament for the Loire River, there's the embassy of the North Sea in the Netherlands, so it's booming. It's also creating this amazing reaction by people. Phoebe is going to talk about imagination, but it creates this people from the political spectrum that won't expect to react like this. It's a way to change politics. But also what for me is striking coming from the law, it's going back to my first year of law and study, those relationships between the local council and the central authorities. That's going to be key for whatever happens. All those initiatives are coming from the local level. Westminster might fall on you. It's the same in France, it's very centralized, the same in Germany, the same in Spain. Those countries always say, me, the states, I hold, this is my river, I have the sovereignty. All those initiatives are challenging that big time. It's local democracy, basically, big time. We don't know what they're going to do. We know in the US, all those things you mentioned, Flora, all those, there was 52 now initiatives at the local council level in the US. All of them seemingly have been seriously dismissed by the courts. Why? Because again, the US had federal power doesn't allow that. So I think what I'm thinking is like, we're going to need a lot of lawyers that are able to fight back in terms of political democracy. Say the local council have the authorities because this is their river, this is where the people live. So there's a big issue of, I think, decentralization or a new form of democracy that is at stake there, which you can feel, change the politics in lyrics, but it's happening everywhere. When you put right of nature into the local council, that changed the dynamic. It's been the same in Northern Ireland, there's been a lot of initiatives. So also what I find interesting, what you mentioned, Emma, is the idea of representation. What I like with the right of nature is there's no framework that has to be followed, basically. You're going for a charter, people in the Loire going for parliaments. There will be a parliament that will be on the river, all the different entities. There could be an embassy, there could be local authorities, there could be guardianship. It's an open platform for us, basically, in our relationship with the local environment. Think of, why am I entitled to speak on behalf of that national? So if you think in terms of representation, this is the main job of what you're doing, representing interests of people. It's totally different because you have a new client. And that client is someone that belongs to your family. So that's also changing the frame of, can you speak on behalf of the Thames River? Well, it's not far from me. You have a connection to Thames. So it's opening this idea of what is representation? Or do we speak on behalf of the natural entity? Which I think, going back to Emma's points, opens or destroy barriers in the mindset of some people that are so conservative that they will never get it. Suddenly it's like, I'm not surprised with this story, conservative, that suddenly maybe she saw that because it talks to something very human in us. So in that sense, it's a new form of law as well, of representation. So sorry, I lost the track with the question. The global picture, I won't do again what you did, because you went across them. At the moment, this, there are nerds like me in academia, we have time to that. We counted there's 422 initiatives across the world at the moment. Just 2 years ago, there was only 100. So it's booming, but it's booming in the same way of, is it really, the way you said, who's as right if you follow, if you read The Guardian, you'll be like, wow, that's it, they've done it. In real life, it's been initiative that pushed to use the legal language of the river as rights, but it's not yet there. And I think many of those initiatives, like 80% of them are at that stage. What they need is lawyers that will be ready to fight for the next step. Say, when the government falls back, say, sorry, this is London, this is Westminster, the Parliament. You could not do that in Lewis. You don't have the power to do that. It will be pushed back, say, no, what will you do? But it will be like Paul going on the trees and etc. But this is the next, it will happen very faster than we think, basically. So yeah, sorry, I'm going.
Yeah.
Well, then we'll go back to your question.
Yeah, I have another question about initiatives. I think there was a Colombian case in an international human rights court, isn't there, that is kind of pushing the same ideas in an international court context.
get to that. Sorry, going back on track to international law. So international has been a bit strange. It's been kind of dormant on the issue. So there's no treaty I can point to saying right of nature has made it there. It's not too surprising. International is mainly about state sovereignty, and sovereignty includes control, absolute control over the natural resources, and also international is quite supportive of investment law. So it's, there's a traction there which is really negative on the rights of nature. There's been a push by an initiative called UN Harmony on the Rights of Nature, which is gaining traction, and they were successful last year at the COP15. So it's not the COP that we all think about, which is the one on climate. There's another COP, which is on biodiversity. The framework that was adopted last year recognized that rights of nature approaches is a way to do biodiversity conservation. Basically, it made it finally to international law under the Biodiversity Convention. So it's opening a space there for international law. But the other big space, which could be surprising, is coming from human rights law. When I say surprising, often I say, I'm professor in human rights, and people say, but during right of nature, it's ambiguous at best, because human rights are very anthropocentric. It's all about the human. So the connection is not automatic, but it's been made by all those cases at the international level, mainly led by indigenous communities. So going back to where I started, going to the court and say, the main point for many indigenous communities is they don't have a piece of paper that says this is their land. They've already been there forever, but they've been stalled by other interests. The arguments that say, but we've been there forever, and also that land is not only land, it's family, it's part of our kinship relationship. This is using human rights law that has been allowing this kind of advances. And in 2017, the International Court of Human Rights has made a connection saying the rights to a healthy environment includes the right for nature to have rights, independently of us. That was an advisory opinion at the time. Then it moved on in 2021. There was a case against Argentina where they agreed. And they again say that, yeah, we have human rights, but nature also has rights. So really, international human rights law is really the platform that is allowing the rights of nature to land into the court cases. Just a few months ago, I was supporting a community in Colombia. They are on the land that has a lot of oil potential. So they've been facing with the Exxon for a long time. This community is called the EU, so if you want to check them out. The argument was say that you cannot take the oil because it's the blood of Mother Earth, which are the first, they lost all their cases at the national level, but now they're going to the regional court system, the American Court of Human Rights. And there's a good feeling that they're going to win that argument, saying that because it's a cultural right, and therefore it should be protected, so maybe oil shouldn't be extracted. So it's floating a little bit on the case you mentioned, Los Cedos, that's also make this argument in Ecuador that we can't basically start follow up this extraction. So this is, I don't know why I started. International is going to be difficult because international protects a lot of international investments. This is where there's going to be a massive clash between more human rights cases on this and investment treaties and protect. That are going to be antagonistic on that front, let's say. So sorry, a bit of a long one on that case, but the one in Colombia is the one ongoing. I do hope there will be a decision soon. But there's more and more international cases, so it might be a way as well to speak about it. I'm not saying the Open Court of Human Rights might be a place to be at the moment, but it might be to really push on terms of the central development saying no, you can't do that. There's actually an argument saying that it's part of our human rights to have a connection with nature, which is part of our cultural rights and privacy of family life.
Great, thank you. And last but not least, Phoebe, you're the founder of Moral Imagination. Could you tell us a bit more about Moral Imaginations and also the role that you think that imagination has in legal innovation and the work of lawyers in rights of nature?
Great question. Big questions. If I forget to get to the second one, will you remind me? Fantastic. So I'm here as a non-lawyer, but very fascinated in the place where imagination and moral imagination meets the law. And we can go into that in a second. I started life, just to give a bit of context, I guess there's some parallels to some of the others on this panel in that I started life as a scientist and went into working in technology and innovation. I was working at Imperial College London in biotech and had my plan was to go to Silicon Valley and to be in that world and kind of really work in tech. And quite quickly, I became disillusioned with technology's power to actually change systems and the current forms of innovation that are available. And I came to this realization that I still, is one of the core things that we as an organization, Moral Imaginations, talks about today when we work with organizations and local councils, which is that we think we have resource problems, but actually we have imagination problems. And I think the same thing applies in this context of the law. It's like, we think we look for the things that are the problems, or like the carbon and climate, but actually what is creating the problems that we see, what these are all symptoms of, are a crisis in the way we see the world and in the way we imagine and kind of imagine ourselves, imagine humans' relationships to each other, to nature, even to the future. And so I started Moral Imaginations with this small ambition, like, how can we actually change the way people think about themselves, about nature, about the future? And coined this term. It's an old term, actually, moral imagination. It's not a new term. It's a very old one. But we have taken it and defined it as imagination on behalf of the welfare of the whole, so of others and of nature. And what we do is we train people. So we actually developed a training because we were approached by a council, local council in London, Camden Council, which is a really, really innovative and trailblazing council. They approached us and asked, could you actually develop training of this mindset and this shift in worldview for our council officers? And so we went on that journey back in 2021, started developing that. And at the core of our model are these three pillars. So first pillar is nature in the more than human world. The second pillar are future generations. And the third pillar are ancestors and kind of looking to the past and taking moral responsibility for the actions of people from the past. And so what we do is we work with imagination to develop empathy with these three stakeholders, in a sense, and then help people embed that into their policies, into their governance, and into their organizations. And this is where that then interfaces and kind of touches on the legal innovation work, because in my view, like, it's almost like the law and those are like the deep codes and rules of society, which actually embed our beliefs, our imaginations, essentially. So that's like the biggest win, is when you can actually go into that deep code and rewire how that works. And what where are we?
Role in
The role of
legal innovation.
Right. Yeah. So often when I talk about this subject, sometimes it's quite intangible or abstract. So I try and ground that for you. But if we think back to history in the last 100 years, every major social change, civil rights, women getting the vote, all of that always starts in imagination, and it always seems impossible until it's done. When I talk to people who live in Germany and talk about the Berlin Wall, before the Berlin Wall fell down, it seemed completely impossible. With the civil rights movement, it wasn't that long ago when we lived in a world where these things that today just seem completely part of the furniture of policies or laws or our rights as women, or these things now just seem like totally part of normality. But it wasn't that long ago that they seemed impossible. And so I think where you can use imagination and moral imagination as lawyers is to help stretch the imagination, stretch people's belief of what is considered impossible. And right now, for a lot of people, nature having rights or personhood would seem really ridiculous or impossible. And there's a great quote by a futurist called Jim Data who talks about how any useful policy should seem ridiculous today. So if any useful policy, like, people should laugh at you or should think this is ridiculous. And I don't think it's that long ago that people, you know, rights of nature was considered quite a kind of fluffy or laughable thing. And we were just talking before this event with Emma that it was seen as a bit of a kind of like, oh yeah, you know, rights of nature, like that hippie kind of side project. And now it's, you know, now we're seeing it really, this movement start to gain pace. And I think, like, as Paul said, this is the moment, like, it's already a movement that's gaining traction. And you could all be part of that as kind of legal innovators and, yeah, getting involved in that and actually help make it happen. So I think imagination, you know, is the core of any, like, legal innovator, right, or legal activist. And I think if you're here at this event today, it's because you probably agree that we're in quite a dire situation on Earth. We've never needed more activists than right now. And all of you, you know, legal activists have the chance to actually change the codes and the policies and the kind of deep rules of how things work. So I feel very hopeful, and yeah, I hope you'll get very inspired by all of these amazing lawyers and kind of get involved in that.
Great, thanks. I think in the interest of time, I'll spare you my questions and open up the floor for anyone who'd like to ask a question. I think we have time for a few. I know you mentioned top, so no. Matilda,
Yes, I've got a question from the online audience. And it's got French words in that, I'm gonna butcher. Professor Phoebe Tickell argues that rights of nature are in a sense a mirage juridique, because environmental organisations can take legal action in defence of nature without needing to use the rights of nature. So I think you've all touched on this in a couple of ways, but can you maybe speak more on why is it important from a practical legal point of view to use the rights of nature thesis? How is this particularly beneficial to nature as a kind?
Can I give a practical example from the roading on that? Yeah. I think this goes back to what I said right at the start, that rights of nature isn't just one thing. It's not like a set of even a charter or rights. This is the rights of nature. And this is why it needs to be done this way. It's often like a process thing. As an example on the roading, we can imagine, right, the laws could be exactly the same as they are now. So the actual laws that we have related to the river could be exactly the same, but there'd be a huge difference if the river had personhood, because then there'd be someone to actually enforce those laws. At the moment, the state agency that's tasked with enforcing the laws, the Environment Agency, is not doing their job. So I, just by walking the river, have discovered serious criminal offences happening that no one even knew was happening. So actually, we could change the laws, or we could include the rights of nature, as in the river has the right not to be polluted. We could pass an act of Parliament. It might make very little difference if nobody is actually enforcing that law. But imagine if the river had personhood. And imagine if the river had guardians that were looking out for it, who actually did walk the river and who prosecuted those sewage spills, so that Thames Water don't just get away with it, which they are. Remember, when I found the sewage spills, they've been going on for 4 years now, and I keep asking Thames Water, like, you're going to fix that? And they're like, whoa, it's quite expensive, and, you know, obeying the law is kind of pricey, is basically their response. And I wish I belonged to an organisation that actually had represented the river and could actually just take to court and be like, right, we'll see you in court. And as an example, again, of a specific change you could make that would bring a rights of nature approach. At the moment, environmental fines go to the Treasury. So even if Thames Water is prosecuted for something they do on the river, that money goes to the Treasury. Imagine, imagine if the money just from the criminal offences that Thames Water is already committing went to the river in a trust fund for the river that had to be spent on and held on trust in the fiduciary duty for the river. I would guesstimate just from the offences under the current laws, if that money went to the roading, we would have enough money to employ a team of maybe a dozen people to act for the river. To maybe a full-time person whose job is to look through planning applications and then write a response on behalf of the river. A full-time person to organise litter picks across the river. A full-time person just to walk the river, so that every section of the river gets walked at least once a month. So you know if there's fly tipping going in, you know if there's sewage spills. That alone would make a massive difference. And that's not about changing the underlying laws. That would be with the current legal system. But just by changing the process, changing the way we relate to nature and the way things are set up, can make a huge difference. that's just one practical example, and I think there's probably dozens of others of similar things you could do that would make it more than a mirage to really.
Yeah, we do that.
Yeah, I'll keep it brief because I'm sure there's tons of questions. I've got two questions. The first one is, I'll make them both for Paul. So, yeah, so you talked about, I mean, this, yeah, interest of time. So spirituality is, I think, for me, the big issue, because the thing is, there's a lot of activity going on at Davos right now about nature markets, biodiversity credits, putting nature on the balance sheet. So I think, and it's dressed up in a sort of Orwellian doublespeak, like, oh, we care about nature, but actually that's the problem, like Jérémie's saying, people are putting a price on nature as property, and this country's got the kind of property obsession and company law obsession, you know, that actually, you know, prevents this spiritual aspect of nature. We're all born here as the global commons. People say if you put this price on nature on the global financial market, then people will start respecting the environment or offset their environmental exposure. So that's the one question. Of course, others on the panel have an opinion on that. That would be also welcome to hear. And the other thing as well is, okay, you're talking about activism, and I'm really hesitating about bringing this question up. But it's like, as a person of color, I've been getting arrested for me, you know, my presence is criminalized. I am a permanent resident of the UK. I'd love to do things like protest more, but if I get arrested, I'll be deported, probably. I don't think it's likely that my charges will be dropped, and I think that really prevents me from, and I'm actually like very militant in my views in terms of the environment. So I just want to open it up, but I also ask the question very reluctantly because I'm not asking in an aggressive way. I'm just saying I would be really scared of getting arrested. Yeah.
I know it's good to me, but I've also spoken quite a lot, although not to be fair right to nature, so I'm very happy to have any answers to those they want to make the other voices again. Okay, I mean, I guess I think the spiritual question is quite a deep one. I could be here all day.
Yeah, no,
I don't know where to start with that. I mean, there's whole things around the Christian religion and what that's done in terms of our relation to nature and how we need to recast that. I think the activism one is more is quite interesting because I think maybe because of the story I told there, that caste activism is something where you will always end up in a kind of situation with the police. That's not the case. Yeah. I'd say that's less than 20% of activism, to be honest. And I have to be careful as well. Like if I get convicted of something of a serious nature, I can get disbarred. So when I did that action over the tree, I did it quite knowingly. Like if my advice had been that it would be lawful to fell the trees, then I would not have climbed that tree because then it would be aggravated trespass. I could have got arrested, convicted, and might have lost my job. I was just quite sure that my advice was correct. Yeah. And that it wasn't lawful to fell the trees, and that the police was being utter shit, basically, and basically like making up arrests to try and get the trees felled, and that the charges would be no further action, which they were. I understand other people can't even take that risk, but I think to reduce activism to things which is just arrestable is wrong. There is so much we can do. And maybe instead of activism, we can just call it guardianship, which is in reality the indigenous relationship to land. And as an example, I went to Ecuador last autumn, and I went to speak to a tribe called the Sinangue, who'd won in a rights of nature case to protect their territory from illegal mining. And I went to ask them about the case, and they actually didn't want to talk about the case that much. They were like, yeah, the case is all very well and good, but to be honest, like, we won that case, but people were still coming onto our territory, still acting illegally. They set up a Guardia Indígena to basically literally walk their territory using old-fashioned means, but also drones, to like literally check if people were entering their territory illegally, if they were doing illegal things. And I think that, to me, could be a really beautiful basis of activism or guardianship in this country, is getting to know a part of nature. Choose a woodland or a river or a park or a part of nature that is ideally geographically close to where you live or spend your time, and get to know it and then act in its interest. And a lot of the time you won't be the one at risk of arrest, you'll be trying to get other people arrested, like water companies arrested. So you'll be walking your river and you'll be like, you'll just notice there's a sewer outlet there, or there's some rubbish you can organise a litter pit to take out. And people around the country start this. We actually have one in the audience tonight from the sister river, the River Brent, who came, Ben at the back there, who came, hi Ben. non-lawyer, someone who doesn't want to get arrested, who just started looking at their river and being like, actually, what is going on here? This river is in a bad way and I want to protect it, and just started doing stuff.
Mm.
And I'm reasonably sure that if you wanted to step into that relationship of guardianship, that all of you in this room could find a part of nature which was desperately needing a human in that relationship, and where you can make a huge difference without any risk of ever getting.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question. Yeah, would you like to? Yeah, in the green chair.
Thank you. I'll stand up. Hi, I'm Laurie. I'm a lawyer in London. I'd like to just ask quite a general question to you guys, not a legal one. But I grew up in Austria, which is quite a pristine environment, and I was shocked moving to England, the extent of fly tipping and waste in the public space. And I'd like to hear your takes on why that is. Given that there are, for example, laws against fly tipping, there are laws against putting toxic waste down the storm drains. People still do it with empty paints or whatever. So what is the cultural layer, perhaps particularly from you thinking, that we need to look at there beyond the legal? Because there are laws, people don't seem to mind breaching them.
Mm. Yeah, start us off. I mean, again, like the spiritual questions can get very big and very philosophical very, very fast. However, through my research, and I'm currently writing this up as a book, like really what I've got to the core of is some of the core kind of mindsets and drivers that I think underlie a lot of the issues that we're seeing today. And like one of them has already been mentioned today, it's the separation from nature, seeing humans as not inherently part of the web of life, as one species among many. That's reflected in our ownership models, and humans can own things when actually we share the planet with millions of other species. Another one is anthropocentrism, humans being at the center, or we see the human species as at the apex of all of life. I mean, when I say we, I really mean the Western capitalist modernity. There is a name for this culture that we're born into here in the UK, but which also dominates a lot of other parts of the world. And it extends beyond our relationship to nature as well, to our relationship to time. Short-term cycles, the fact that our political cycle is 4 years, our companies work in kind of 3-month or 5-year strategies. I mean, once you start uncovering this, and this starts to get into very philosophical and not so much the legal realm, but there is an entire water that we are swimming in the West, which we then translate into our economic governance and legal systems, and we're seeing the result of that. That's what I think. Climate change is really just one symptom of a much deeper issue and kind of virus in terms of a way of seeing and thinking, and that gets introduced to us at schools and our workplaces, and our entire culture we're swimming in it. It's a kind of invisible water. And the last one we speak a lot about is a kind of historical, a kind of amnesia of the past, of like how did we get here, colonial histories. That's another piece which I think is worth mentioning. But this is almost like the topic of a whole other talk. And if somebody else would like to talk a bit about that as well, I thought it's worth mentioning. Capitalism is a big part of it. For the record.
I don't know about anybody else, but I spend quite a lot of my time picking up plastic. So I've got dogs, and I walk a lot, and I always think when I'm out and about, if I can just take 5 pieces of plastic and put it in a bin, then there's something in that, and if I can talk to other people about the fact that I'm doing that, I guess it gets a little bit back to what Paul was saying about that sort of that just guardianship that maybe we have as an intrinsic sense of ourselves and how we inhabit this world. I don't think it really gets to your question about actually what is this cultural malaise that we have in Britain that seems to be that we do, or as a society we carry out reckless acts of pollution or disregard. But I mean, Phoebe's absolutely right about that. There is this disconnect, and I think we all have to work very hard. I used to be a trustee at my local wildlife trust, and it was a thing that just came up again and again. We've got to get kids back engaged with nature. They've lost their connection. They see themselves as separated. You know, I think the statistics about you know, the range that children have now being sort of 5 meters compared to, you know, 60 years ago, you know, how much more freedom and a trust, I suppose, we gave to our kids. So, I mean, there's a whole question about, you know, how we do that. You know, we've got to get into schools and you know, and talk to the children. I was saying to Phoebe earlier, something I heard on the radio about, you know, what's the big word for children this year? What's come out in surveys? It's climate change. You know, our children are growing up in fear, and you know, that is, we've got to do something to change all that. I don't know where I'm going with this, but I'm just rambling on.
Maybe that's the conclusion.
I have a very practical answer, I'm afraid. A very quick practical answer against that, so as quick as I can. It's actually a real issue for me personally, because having entered into a kind of guardianship relationship of care with eroding, I now feel like I'm stuck in a cycle where I either have to spend quite a lot of my winter cleaning up other people's crap for free, or have to deal with the fact that the river I love looks like a complete shit the whole time, and I don't know what the end game is. And it really worries me. And like literally, I either have to put up with the fact my like river is ruined. I mean, like on a low eroding of the reed bed, on an area that hadn't been cleaned for years. I did a survey and I counted 50 pieces of litter bigger than my fist in a 1 square meter area, so literally coated. But I'm like, I don't want to spend the rest of my life cleaning up other people's crap. It's horrible. It's really hard, difficult work. I have to give up my winter to, like, you know, 7 work days a winter of like hard graft, muddy, dirty, cold. And I have tried to change cultural things. You know, we do stuff on the local Facebook page, we do stuff on social media. I put up signs saying this river is a nature reserve, it's looked after by volunteers, please don't throw your trash here. I talk to everyone I see drinking on a bench, being like, hey guys, love that you're enjoying the river side, can you make sure you put that in the bin afterwards? And if I ever see someone chucking it in, I tell them, you know, tell them off, but hasn't made a difference really. We've cleaned, when I first cleaned the stretch, we would like get 100 or 200 bin bags out of a 100-meter stretch in some areas of the roading. And I thought, okay, we'll do it once, then it'll be fine. No, same every year, almost pretty much the same amount, over and over again. So I do think that cultural change is probably not going to come fast enough. I also think that trying to influence end user behavior has clearly failed. Like no matter what the fines are, people are still going to do it because it's the very low likelihood of getting caught. So to me, thinking through the problem systemically, the only way we can stop this destruction is by actually thinking about the entire user life cycle of a product. And actually, when you think about it, the reason this problem exists is because some people find it very profitable to make containers, single-use containers, that they have zero plan for at the end of it, other than printing a little picture on their packaging to say recycle this and a picture of somebody in the bin. which by the way isn't even that effective because then it goes in the bin and gets thrown in a giant hole somewhere else, which isn't really a solution to the problem. So actually, what those companies are doing is not including an externality, i.e. the disposal of that packaging within their costings and putting that either on nature or basically using people that love nature as unpaid slave labor, which is what they're doing to me. They're saying, if you love nature enough, you don't want to see our products strewn all around it, you go and pick it up, mate. And they deliberately foster this culture. So they fund groups which basically say, oh, aren't litter bugs awful? And they give litter pickers to local groups. And they do, I think it's propaganda to basically make the end user the problem. Oh, litter bugs, they're really bad. And actually what we need to be saying is, no, you're producing this. It's clearly, the current system is clearly not working. It's getting out into nature. Therefore, it is your problem to solve, probably through a deposit return scheme, which all these big companies are lobbying furiously against because it will reduce their profits.
Exactly.
So, and I'm starting to get a bit more militant. I'm starting to think, actually, maybe I should just stop picking this up, putting it in a bag and getting the council to take it away. Maybe we should actually pick it up, find out which companies are producing this, take it back to them, or maybe the fancy lawn of their CEO or their main shareholder, and say, well, actually, do you like this all over your home? Why should it be over mine? Do something about it. You know, that maybe is how we need to start getting more medicine. But any lawyers out there who want to start suing these companies or investigating or like lobbying in this kind of activism way for stopping single-use packaging, it would be amazing. It's such a dangerous nature. And again, Ben, the other river guy in the back, when we did a sort of joint day together as river guardians, we were like, that is one of our top issues.
Thank you. Thank you so much to all of our panelists. I think we'll have a break of a couple of minutes. And if people can feedback just before 10 past, if you need to go to the loo or anything, Phoebe will be using the creative content.
We will be doing some imagination together. Yes, we've got 5 minutes break.
Same company you're going on with. I just not that's why we're not considering going to law school, but a lot more
Right, so just before we start our creative content, I just want to plug, we have, shamelessly plugging, just doing a shameless plug, thank you all for coming to LVS event. You can find us on LinkedIn and can also, find us on our fundraising platform, Buy Me a Coffee, if anyone would like to donate. Also, look out for updates on our mailing list for future knowledge sessions, and we also have an anniversary event coming up at the very beginning of February, which has just gone live. So if you'd like to come along to that, please do. And with that, I will pass over to you, Phoebe.
Great, I'm gonna stand up so I can see you all, since it's like quite hot, so hoping it might cool down by standing up. So we've only got about 10, 15 minutes, but I wanted to do some kind of short exercise just to give you a bit of a taste of you know, the moral imagination, how to like awaken that sense of caring about something other than yourself. But we do have a very short amount of time. So I'm going to start with one exercise, and you probably only have time for one. But if we have time for a second one, I'll do a second one. Do make sure you're sitting next to someone, because what would be great is that we do a short closed eye meditation, guided visualization exercise, and then you can turn to the person next to you and talk about it. And we'll hear a bit back, and we'll be done by 8:30. So without further ado, if you'd like to make yourself comfortable in your seat, don't fall asleep, try not to fall asleep. Right, it's getting late. But this is just a it's just a chance to have totally relax. If you feel comfortable, do close your eyes. And if you just prefer to just lower your eyes, that's also fine. And maybe just take a really deep breath in. And just let yourself exhale. Relax. Let's do that again. Breathe in. Exhale. One more time, breathing in. And just let all the tension out from your shoulders on the exhale. And allow yourself to just really arrive in your seat. Feel the weight of your body on the chair. I'm just going to really use a bit of mindfulness to arrive in our bodies. We've been talking a lot of very intellectual ideas and thoughts. So just letting yourself arrive in your body. And almost consciously make the effort to say hello to your body and presence yourself. So you might want to start by taking your attention to your shoulders, any tension you have there, allowing your shoulders to relax. From your shoulders, you move into your chest, to your heart. You might be able to feel into a heartbeat. And taking your attention into your stomach, your belly. You might be aware of any emotions there. You might have some excitement or nervousness, sadness, whatever is there. Taking a moment to be present, the feeling of being in your body. And then taking your attention to your sitting bones, where your body touches the seat. And if you've forgotten to be following your breath, just remind yourself again, following your breath in and out. And allowing yourself just to completely relax. In this really relaxed state, I'm going to ask you to open up your imagination and allow yourself to think about or allow the image of a place you really, really love in nature to appear. You might have multiple images come up. You might see a tree that is special to you. Maybe it's a favorite spot from your childhood. Maybe the garden where you grew up. For some of you, that might be the ocean. Allow one of these images, one of these places to claim you in your imagination. One of them is going to claim you. I'd like to be spoken for. Yeah. And I'd like you to imagine that one day you receive a letter that this place, this tree, this garden, this plot of land, this part of the ocean, this place is under threat by a legal entity, a corporation, an entity that we do recognize in this 21st century culture as having legal rights. But it's threatening this place that is incredibly special to you, and that you know But if you do not take action on behalf of this place or tree or special place in nature, it will be destroyed. And at this point, I'd love you to just sense back into how it feels in your body, whether that's in your belly, your heart, your throat. How would it feel to know that this place would no longer ever exist ever again? Just allowing yourself to take note of that. And now I'd like you to imagine the second half of this exercise, that we're now in some point in the future. Don't know which year exactly, maybe it's 10 years in the future or maybe beyond. And thanks to the efforts of the campaigners and lawyers and activists in the last 10, 15 years, this place or this tree or this river, wherever it is, whatever it is, it's now been given rights. And you are being called on as a lawyer to speak on behalf of this place. You find out again that this special place is under threat. You can imagine, you know, what kind of corporation might be wanting to extract something from this place. Maybe there are precious minerals, or you know, maybe that it's a great site for a new build of some kind, a new block of flats or a wealthy person's house. And you as a lawyer are being invited, maybe for the first time in history, to speak on behalf of this place and to give nature a voice. I'd like you to imagine, you know, appearing in court and opening your mouth and speaking on behalf as a guardian, as a representative of this place. What do you say? What do you feel? What moves you? How would you give voice to this part of nature that is finally being recognized as having legal personhood or having rights? There might be words coming up in your imagination, maybe something surprises you. How would you represent this place? So what we're going to do in a moment, I'm going to ask you to open your eyes and return back to the chair, back to this moment in time. And you wriggle your fingers and your toes. And land back in this room. And then you've got your partner next to you. I'd love you just to take a couple of minutes each. What is the place? What is that special place that came up for you? What did you discover in that exercise? And what words came up? You just spend a couple minutes sharing. We'll just give a couple people back, and then we'll close. So make sure you both get a chance to share. We'll just have about 4 minutes in total.